It was Christmas Eve, a night when families gathered, laughter filled the air, and warm meals were shared around glowing tables. But at the far end of a quiet restaurant, a man sat alone. His name was Richard Hale, a powerful CEO who had built an empire of glass towers and shining offices. Yet here he was, with no one to sit across from him. The candle flickered in front of him, but it did little to soften the emptiness in his chest. Outside, the snow kept falling, and inside, Richard wondered why the world felt so far away. Around him, the restaurant was alive. Children's laughter echoed, the clinking of glasses mixed with soft Christmas music, and families leaned close to one another, sharing food and stories. Everywhere he looked, there was warmth, togetherness, joy. But at his table, there was silence, a silence so heavy it pressed on his chest. Richard adjusted his cufflinks, not because they needed fixing, but because he had nothing else to do with his hands. He told himself he didn't need anyone, that he had his work, his company, his wealth. But tonight, even those thoughts felt like shadows against the golden lights. It was then, from the corner of his eye, Richard noticed her, a little girl, no older than 7, with curls tied in ribbons, and a dress as red as Christmas itself. She clutched a small reindeer toy to her chest, her eyes round with curiosity. For a moment, their gazes met. Richard expected her to turn away, like most children did when they sensed his stern presence. But instead, she tilted her head and kept watching him, as though she could see the loneliness he tried so hard to hide. Before he could look away, the girl slid off her chair and walked toward him, her tiny shoes tapping against the wooden floor. Richard straightened in his seat, startled. She clutched her toy tightly, but didn't stop until she reached his table. Behind her, her parents watched with soft, encouraging smiles. Richard glanced at them, uncertain, then back at the girl. She looked up at him with wide eyes, full of innocence and something he had not felt in years. Kindness. Then, in a voice as soft as the falling snow outside, she asked, "Do you want to have dinner with us?" The words were simple, yet they struck him deeper than any speech or praise he had ever received in his long career. Richard blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. A CEO, who had closed million-dollar deals with confidence, suddenly found himself speechless before a child. He looked down at her, his mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. His hand, still resting near his untouched wine, trembled faintly. Richard's first instinct was to say no, to remind himself that strangers did not invite CEOs to dinner, that he didn't belong in their world of simple joys and family warmth. But the words caught in his throat. He stared at the little girl, at the way she hugged her toy while waiting for his answer. No judgment in her eyes, no agenda, just a pure, genuine invitation. His chest tightened. It had been so long since anyone had asked him to join them, not as a businessman, not as a leader, but simply as a man. Richard looked past the girl and saw her parents watching. The mother's smile was kind, her eyes saying, "You're welcome here." The father gave a small nod, the kind a man gives another man when words aren't needed. Their table was filled with roasted turkey, bread rolls, and dishes that smelled of home, a home Richard hadn't felt in years. The sight tugged at something buried deep inside him. He looked back down at the girl, who waited without impatience, as though she already knew he needed this moment to decide. Finally, with a breath that felt heavier than stone, Richard pushed back his chair. The sound seemed to echo louder than all the chatter around him. The little girl's face lit up instantly, a smile so bright it melted the icy walls around his heart. Slowly, he stood, adjusting his suit jacket as though stepping into an unfamiliar role. And when the child reached out her small hand, he hesitated only for a moment, before placing his larger, calloused one in hers. Together, they walked toward her family's table. For the first time in many years, Richard felt he was walking toward something that truly mattered. The family's table was warm, alive, filled with dishes that carried the smell of love. The mother welcomed him with a smile that asked for nothing. The father poured juice into his daughter's cup with gentle care. Richard sat down, stiff at first, uncertain of where to place his hands. But then the little girl tugged on his sleeve and pulled his chair closer to hers. He couldn't help the small smile that tugged at the corner of his mouth. For the first time in many years, he wasn't looking across an empty table. He was looking at faces filled with kindness. Dinner began with laughter. The girl told her story about her toy reindeer getting lost in the snow, making her father chuckle and her mother shake her head, pretending to scold her gently. Richard sat in silence at first, his fork untouched, just listening. The sound of their laughter wrapped around him like a blanket. It was soft, genuine, something his world of boardrooms and contracts could never give. Slowly, without realizing, a smile found its way to his face. He had forgotten how it felt to simply enjoy the company of others. As the meal went on, Richard found himself speaking. At first, just a few words, but then, stories slipped out about the long hours at work, the silence of his home, the holidays he had buried himself in business to avoid. He didn't mean to share so much, yet, the way they listened, it made the words come easily. The little girl leaned closer, as if every word mattered. Her parents nodded with quiet understanding, never judging, only listening. Richard realized it had been years since anyone had listened to him in this way. As the girl laughed again, cheeks rosy and eyes sparkling, Richard felt something shift inside him. She ate happily, crumbs on her lips, her little reindeer toy seated proudly beside her plate, and in that simple, ordinary scene, Richard saw what had been missing from his life. Not success, not wealth, but warmth, connection, a table where laughter came easily, and silence wasn't heavy but comforting. He realized how long he had been chasing things that could never fill the emptiness inside him. When the plates were nearly empty and the candles had burned low, the little girl reached across the table. In her tiny hand was a candy cane, striped red and white. She held it out with the same innocence as her invitation. "This one's for you," she said softly. Richard stared at it, surprised. No one had given him a gift on Christmas in years. Slowly, he took it, the edges pressing into his palm, and in that simple gesture, he felt something priceless. He belonged, even if only for this night. When dinner was done, they rose together. Outside, the snow had thickened, covering the world in a white silence. The family walked ahead, but the little girl held tightly to Richard's hand, leading him through the drifting snowflakes. For once, he didn't mind the cold. He didn't mind the quiet. Beside them, the Christmas lights sparkled against the night sky, and as they walked out together, Richard realized something he had almost forgotten. Christmas was not meant to be spent alone. Richard knelt down in the snow, looking into the little girl's eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice unsteady. She only smiled, as if she had done nothing more than share her dinner. But to Richard, she had given him something far greater reminder of what truly mattered. He rose, his heart lighter than it had been in years. As he walked away that night, he promised himself he would never let another Christmas pass in silence. For the first time in a long time, he was not the lonely CEO. He was simply a man who had been given the gift of belonging.